If you've been riding Amtrak lately and wondering, why are we just sitting here? You're not alone. In 2024, Amtrak passengers racked up a jaw-dropping 850,000 minutes of delays. And the biggest culprit? Freight trains. But here's the kicker. A new piece of legislation threatens to strip Amtrak's long-standing right-of-way preference on shared rail lines, making the situation even more chaotic. So what is going on, and what's the public reaction? Stick around, because in today's episode of Great Trainspeed, we're diving into the full story. For decades, Amtrak passenger trains in the U.S. have had a tough time running smoothly, mostly because they don't own the tracks they run on. Instead, they must share with big freight railroads like Union Pacific, BNSF, CSX, and Norfolk Southern, which control most of the country's rail infrastructure. By law, Amtrak is supposed to get priority on those tracks, but in reality, freight trains often go first, leaving Amtrak stuck waiting. That's been a major source of delays, especially on long routes, like the Sunset Limited or the Empire Builder, where trains can run hours late just because of freight traffic. This isn't just a small inconvenience, it's one of the biggest reasons why long-distance train travel in the U.S. feels unreliable. Imagine booking a trip and showing up on time, only to spend the next few hours sitting on a side while a mile-long freight train rolls by. It's frustrating for passengers, bad for ridership, and makes it harder for Amtrak to grow or improve service. We're about to dive into just how serious the situation has gotten in the next part and what Amtrak is doing about it. If you care about the future of U.S. rail, now's the time to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter in this unfolding story. Amtrak's long-distance network is facing a serious punctuality problem in 2024. Not a single route has met the Federal Railroad Administration's benchmark of 80% on-time performance. Even the best performer, the City of New Orleans, just barely missed the mark at 79%. Others didn't come close. Lakeshore Limited sat at 75%, and the Crescent lagged at 62%. But the real red flags? The Silver Meteor ran on time just 42% of the time, the Floridian hit a dismal 36%, and the Southwest Chief came in last at only 33%. These numbers aren't just statistics. They reflect hours of passenger frustration and a system struggling to keep pace. To be fair, Amtrak's been fighting back. They've filed complaints, pushed for stricter rules, and teamed up with the Surface Transportation Board and Federal Railroad Administration to track on-time performance. Back in 2021, new rules were introduced that made it easier to call out freight railroads that were holding up passenger trains. But even with that progress, enforcement has been shaky. Fast forward to now, and not much has changed yet. A few legal cases are still working their way through the system, and there's growing support in Congress for laws that would give Amtrak more power to enforce its right-of-way. Some lawmakers are even talking about building separate passenger-only tracks in key corridors, especially in places where demand is high and delays are constant. Despite gaining support from only 3 co-sponsors, a new piece of legislation aimed at revoking Amtrak's long-standing right of preference on shared rail lines has sparked serious concern. AFL-CIO President Greg Regan responded with a sharply worded letter to Representative Burleson, warning that the bill not only threatens Amtrak's operations, but also misdirects the blame. According to Regan, the real issue lies with the freight rail industry's reliance on precision scheduled railroading, PSR, a system that puts profit ahead of service quality and safety. At the heart of the matter is a rail network where freight trains often take priority over passenger service, even though federal law grants Amtrak the right of preference. In practice, this rule is frequently ignored. Amtrak trains are regularly delayed behind freight traffic, which itself suffers from internal inefficiencies, such as signal failures DCS, track work, DMW, slow orders, DSR, and poor dispatching decisions, RTE, all controlled by the host freight railroads. The irony is hard to miss. Passenger trains are delayed not only because freight trains are prioritized, but because those same freight trains are often mismanaged. And yet, it's the public, commuters, families, and travelers who bear the brunt of these failures. Delays mean missed connections, lost time, and a growing loss of faith in rail as a dependable option for transportation. While most of Congress remains focused on more pressing national issues, The fact that a subcommittee chairman is backing this bill signals a deeper intent to weaken the role of passenger rail in America's transportation future. If successful, this move could further entrench a system that continues to sideline public mobility in favor of private freight interests. Until then, though, Amtrak is still stuck playing second fiddle on someone else's railroad. It's a tough spot to be in when you're trying to build a modern, reliable passenger rail system. And for everyday riders, it means that even the best planned trip can go sideways, just because a freight train got there first. If you scroll through any recent Reddit thread on Amtrak's freight conflict or legislation targeting passenger rights, one thing becomes clear. The frustration isn't just with the delays, it's with the system itself. One commenter summed up the mood plainly. Personally, here's hoping that this bill dies just like the previous two did. The bill in question? A proposal that would strip away Amtrak's long-standing right of preference over freight trains on shared tracks. It's a move many see as a step backwards, one that favors corporate railroads at the expense of passengers. Others point to what feels like the obvious fix. Easy solution, Amtrak should own its own track. But even that hope is shaded by realism. I mean, that's basically a pipe dream, but it's obvious what needs to happen. In other words, the idea makes perfect sense, but the political will and financial support just aren't there yet. Digging deeper, some voices call for a more systemic overhaul. The U.S. should nationalize the rail lines themselves, one user suggests. It's a provocative thought, treating railroads like national highways. Let private companies lease access, but let the government own and maintain the infrastructure. As another commenter pointed out, it might even be attractive to the rail companies, since maintaining the rails is the biggest chunk of their expenses. The conversation quickly turns from rail policy to political reality. One user writes, "It's easy to understand why certain decisions are made if you stop attributing fairness and good planning to government agencies. From this perspective, both public highways and private railroads are ultimately built to serve powerful interests, not passengers. And while some hope for progressive reform, there's a shared skepticism. It'd be naive to think the political spectrum in the U.S. is wide enough to accommodate nationalizing the railways or even enforcing something like network neutrality on track usage." So, from the comments, we can clearly see some possible solutions for this problem. One strategy gaining momentum is simple in concept, but massive in scale. Stop depending on freight-owned tracks and start building corridors dedicated solely to passengers. It's a bold pivot, but a logical one. The core issue here is control. Amtrak currently operates on rail lines it doesn't own, meaning passenger trains often have to yield to slower, longer freight traffic. If the goal is to run faster, more reliable service, then giving Amtrak full authority over its own routes is the clearest long-term solution. And this isn't just hypothetical. We've already seen it work. On the Northeast Corridor, Amtrak's flagship route from Boston to Washington, D.C., the company owns most of the track. The result? Trains that run faster, more frequently, and with fewer delays. It's a high-speed spine, where Amtrak sets the schedule, not freight companies. That corridor is living proof. When Amtrak controls the infrastructure, performance improves. Now they're looking to bring that same approach elsewhere. These projects aren't cheap, and they're not fast to build. Laying new track takes years of planning, billions in investment, and political coordination at every level, but the momentum is there. If Amtrak can deliver, these dedicated corridors could mark a turning point, moving passenger rail out of the freight rail shadow and into a new era where service is faster, more frequent, and actually designed around the rider's needs. What do you think? Could this finally be the shift Amtrak needs? Drop a 1 in the comments if you believe Amtrak can pull it off, or a 0 if you're still skeptical. Let's talk rail. That's all for today's ride. Hope you had as much fun as we did. Catch you next time. Until then, stay chill, ride smart, and peace out.